Okay, Emmanuel Levinas. So I see. Actually, some of you were catching on. I was really surprised. Some of you were enjoying the writing, which is, that's how you have to approach it, right? If you heard me in the introduction, that's how I got hooked on Levinas. I didn't understand a word, but I love the writing, right? So if you have some poetic, right, mindset, you immediately resonate with Levinas, even if you don't understand. So those of you who caught on, right, you were actually in the rhythm. You were doing good. So some of you actually were even getting the meaning of what he was saying. That was pretty good. And then most of us are struggling still, right? So we'll look at that today. We'll try and see how we can clarify him a little bit. Okay, so let's get in the text. Today I'm going to talk about the problem of the hidden God. Remember, there's two things we'll look at that I mentioned in the introduction. The problem of the hidden God, and then ethics as a path to God. That one we'll do next week. So today we'll just look at the hidden God. Okay. So let's review, right? We're right after the Holocaust. Everything is shattered, right? So faith in humanity is shattered, but also faith in God, right? This is one of the main shifts that occurs on the spiritual level in Europe especially, is the notion that we thought God was like this, and clearly, right, this is not, he's not responding like we thought he would. Remember, I gave you the God is either good or powerful, can't be both anymore, right? If he's good, he can't, and powerful, wait, how did I put it? He's either powerful and not good. No. How did I do this? Somebody help me. I'm not able to recap this argument that I did. He can't be both powerful and good. So either he's powerful and not good. There, I'm getting it. He's either powerful and not good, right? So he could have stopped it, but he's not good, so he didn't. Or he's good and not powerful, right? He wanted to stop it, but he couldn't. So this is the dilemma, right? We are dealing really with the perspective we had on God is shattered. Now, we don't know yet if God is shattered, but certainly the image, the vision, the understanding, the definition, the concept of God is shattered. And we now have to, in a way, either abandon God altogether, which is what most people did. Somebody like Elie Wiesel, right? Same time as Levinas, for those of you who know him. Didn't abandon, but certainly entered a very rocky relationship, right, with God. And Levinas too, right? Some of you are wondering if he was even still a believer, right? It's a very rocky relationship, right? And you can sense that. He's struggling. The relationship, in a way, there has been this betrayal, this severance, and he's struggling, right, with it. So this is where we are. And what Levinas is going to do is try to find a way back to God, but it cannot be to the same God anymore. That God for Levinas doesn't exist anymore. The God who protects us, who loves us, who interferes in history, is finished. Evidence of that is finished, right? So we're going to see how he weaves his way back, right? And in order to come back to any type of relationship with God, he will have to profoundly redefine who God is. And we're going to be very surprised where he ends up, right? We have to be prepared in this particular class for a radical shift in the way that we see God. And in fact, after the Holocaust, for Levinas, if you don't do that shift, you're still over there naive, regressive, immature, unaware of your surroundings, right? You cannot think of God anymore in that way for Levinas, in the way as the one who protects and interferes after the Holocaust. It's a sign of profound naivete, being very simple, right? So we'll see where he ends up, but it's a struggle, and he is really wrestling with God and himself in the text, which is why, by the way, the text is so convoluted, right? A lot of you were like, why does he write like this? I don't understand. Because Levinas is struggling. You see, you're entering the struggle of the philosopher, right? When you're reading and you're struggling to understand, you're simply tapping into the struggle of the philosopher to think, right? The writing of Levinas is more than convoluted, it's tortured, right? This is a tortured writing. When you read it, you can sense there is an element of pain and grief in the language. He's writing out of this tortured state, and we are, in a way, being tortured with him, right? We are entering the struggle. This is no more the philosophers like Maimonides, everything is clear, let me guide you, right? He knows the way, there is a way. With Levinas, there is no way, he's not a guide, he's lost, more lost than us, and he's trying to find his way back, and he is struggling, and there is a lot, it's like, the closest I can find that how many of you have seen The Passion of Christ? You know that movie, that horrible movie by Mel Gibson? Nobody? Okay, good. Never mind. You didn't miss out on much. But I thought so. Yeah, I didn't like it at all. But this path, right, where you're carrying a big cross, and you're familiar, of course, right, with the crucifixion and the way that Jesus is just sweating blood. This is Levinas here. He's sweating blood as he is writing, right? And so we struggle with him. We're entering now a really dark part of history, right? This is no more the enlightenment, the luminosity of the Middle Ages during Maimonides' time, right? Okay, so this is why we struggle along with Levinas in his own wrestling with God, right? Okay, now going further, let's go into the text with this notion of the hidden God, right? So we'll go in the text and we'll comment a little bit so that by the end, you'll know a few sentences. You'll be able to decipher a few sentences. Okay. So he begins on page 66, and he's talking, of course, about the need to understand that humanity has when it comes to God. We want to understand, we want to know, we want to be sure of what's going on, right? So he says this here on the top, as rational speech. Everyone with me? Wave at me if you're there. 1, 2, thank you. As rational speech, philosophy is taken to move from evidence to evidence, directed to what is seen, to what shows itself, thus directed to the present. Okay, so philosophy in general, the human mind wants evidence, clarity, wants to see, wants to understand. That's what he's saying here. The natural impulse of humans is to understand, make sense of things. And when it comes to God and the Holocaust, we are trying to make sense of this. Right? So it continues, third paragraph. And yet, everybody with me? And yet human thought, wave. Thank you. And yet, he says, even as we try to understand and clarify, he says, human thought has known concepts, or has, as though mad, operated with notions in which the distinction between presence and absence was not as clear-cut as the idea of being. Okay, so now he's saying, as we try to understand, we will stumble on concepts which are both present and absent. So let's stop on this idea, right? And one of these concepts, of course, is God, both present and absent. So let's stop on this and try to figure out, what does Levinas mean when he says that God is both present and absent? It's a paradox. Can you be both present and absent? I can prove you that you can, but tell me what he means. How is God present, but at the same time absent? Anybody want to try? Yes, Michel.
Well, I feel like he's kind of talking about how even though there's no evidence of him doing it, people will still make reasons to say, oh, like this is like God's work. So essentially, even though he's not actually there, people will still have that image in their head that he is.
That's interesting, although he's not saying that, but I like the way you're saying that people will still want it to have, kind of like Nietzsche, right? They will try to project even if there's nothing. It's not what he's saying, but it's showing that there is a kind of, we are constantly trying to make happen something which is not obvious. So that's a good explanation. I don't think that's what he meant, but it works. It works in that context. Good, Amoroso. Okay, so on the one hand, right, but how do we know he's omniscient and... Okay, so people are talking about him, but then when you look at the evidence, zero. So, yes, you can say that too, right? People are talking about him, he's in all kinds of scriptures, and then when you look around, where is that, right? Present and absent. So you guys are catching very well. Epstein.
He's there, not necessarily omniscient. He's there watching and just letting it go by. Not even if maybe he could intervene, maybe he can't. It's not important.
How do you know? How do you know he's there watching?
That's how he phrases it. He phrases it, he's there watching.
Okay, but again, do we know he's there watching? How can we be sure? Is he there watching? Tell me. Give me one reason you think he's there watching. Reason that will convince me. How do we know? Do we know he's there watching? Is there any hint that he's there watching? Is there a small sign that he's there watching? How do we even know to talk about God? Right? So let's see. Still, you haven't yet caught what he's saying exactly. You're doing good at coming close to it. But what does it mean that God is both present and yet absent? Even for the believer, even you believe in God, still both present and absent. What does that mean? Yes.
Like most ethics or morality is based on some perception of who God is and like what He says do or not do. So to the extent that people have moral obligations or like rules, He's present in the foundation of the rules, but not to the extent of Him being a deity that doesn't.
You're so way ahead of us. You're already in the next chapter. So great, keep that. You're totally where Levinas is going, right? But let's go, stay over there ahead of us. We'll catch up. But that's not exactly, so she's right? Levinas is going to go in that direction, but it's not yet what Levinas is trying to say here in this passage. Think about it. You're a believer, and yet even for you, God is both present and absent. Yetov.
Could be that he's present in the sense that your faith experience, he manifests in your faith. So there's that sense of presence. But then in your interaction with reality and the way the world works, you don't encounter him there, but you encounter him in the faith.
Okay, you're close. You're there almost. He's almost there. This is the idea, right? There is signs that God exists, right? We have scriptures, we have the testimony of whatever, the generations, we have some books, we have maybe even some experiences, we have the faith of our ancestors, we have signs that, come our way. And yet, even if we have all of that, we can still not be completely sure that there is a God. You see what I'm saying? Even you're a believer, you read the scripture, you have some internal experience like we learned with Rumi, right? You had some sense of the presence of God. You can never be 100% sure. Why is it that you can or never should be 100% sure? What happens if you go around saying, yeah, I know God exists. I can prove it to you. What's wrong with that picture? Yes. Thank you. Exactly. If you know who God is this small now. Right? He's at the measure of your own reason and your own thinking. So we can see how Levinas is saying, actually, not only is God present and absent, but he should be present and absent. As soon as he's fully present, fully understood, fully obvious, he has become a small idol in your mind. He has become just at the measure of your own thinking. This is not God anymore. This is a construction that you have come up with. This is a projection, and Nietzsche is right here with Levinas, right? You're right to think that there's connections between Nietzsche and Levinas, right? Some of you who were thinking that. Okay, so that's what he's saying, right? So make sure you write this down, that for Levinas, we can never be 100% sure that God exists, right? And if we were, we would be committing the sin of idolatry, right? Which is that, now I know God exists and God is this, right? And I'm sure of it, and you should know too. Now we are not only idolatrous, but we are violent, right? This is the problem. This is the problem with religious violence. It stems always from idolatry. Anytime you see persecution or some kind of violence in the name of religion, look at the root, idolatry. A God at the measure of the person who is killing. I know who God is, and now you have to know, and if you refuse to know, I will kill you. This is the basis. This is why idolatry is such a very, very not problematic, but it's fatal, right? It's how do you call the seven sins that we talked about with Nietzsche? Deadly, yes. It's one, in my view, idolatry is the deadliest sin, right? Because when you have idolatry, that I know who God is, and now you have to know like I know, and I will now impose it on you, right? This is the root of all violence, is this deadliest sin of all, which is idolatry. And Levinas is deeply aware of that. And that's why he says we have to recognize, all of us, whether we are atheist or not, that God is a concept that must remain always present and absent at the same time. If not, we degenerate into idolatry, right? So he says this here. There's a quote here on page 75. Okay, see the big paragraph? Go right in the middle. Then you will see in parentheses IL. Tell me when you're there. Wave at me when you're there. Middle of the big paragraph, parentheses IL, and wave when you found it. Thank you. Okay, reading right after that. The enigma comes to us from Eleiti. And here's the one you underline. The enigma is the way of the absolute, foreign to cognition, not because it would not shine with a light disproportionately strong for the subject's weak side, but because it is already too old for the game of cognition. Okay, so he's here saying, and going further with the vocabulary on this topic, God is present and absent, God is enigma versus phenomenon. So let's talk about that, because that's the title of the essay, right? What is a phenomenon? Anybody know what is a phenomenon? You have to go from the Greek. Do I have a Greek here? No, the Greek is on Zoom. I have two Greeks on Zoom. Yes. Yes, phenomenon from the from Greek. The Greek phenomenon means to manifest, to make visible. Okay, so a phenomenon is something we see, something that is obviously present, right? So it doesn't mean phenomenon in the way we use it, like, it's so phenomenal, like, wow, it's amazing. No, phenomenon simply means something you can see, right? So God for Levinas is not phenomenon, something that you can see, understand, grasp. He is enigma, right? What's an enigma? Yes? Exactly, enigma, enigmatic, right? I don't understand, I don't fully grasp, right? Enigma is another way to say God is both present and absent, right? I see it, but I can't grasp it, right? I'm not sure. I want it, I'm drawn to it, but it escapes me over and over again. That is how Levinas says a healthy relationship with God looks like. When you're always surprised, always jolted out of your comfort zone, always moving beyond your perceptions, right? Always ready to know more and to discover more and to be shocked and surprised out of your complacency, right? Spiritual complacency. And he says the enigma is the way of the absolute. That's how God reveals himself, right? Foreign to cognition, right? Is a foreign to your mind. Your mind cannot grasp, and so forth, okay? So we understand now very well, right, why it's important to see God in that way. But there's one more reason why God chooses to manifest himself as enigma. And I want to talk about this for the rest of the class because it's very interesting. Now, this passage we're about to read, this is a unique moment in the philosophy of Levinas. He's going to say this, and then he will never go back to what he has just told us, right? This is just him having some epiphany, and then he will actually reject that epiphany in the future, right? But we'll go into what he is kind of discovering here or stumbling upon. There is actually another reason why God does not reveal himself obviously. In other words, there's another reason why, God doesn't come to you, right, or come to us on a cloud with trumpets blaring and says, I am the Lord, you will worship me, right? I mean, that would simplify everything. No more questions, right? If you were to do that, appear, right, in glory with a big, whatever, entourage, right? And just say, I am the Lord, worship me. I mean, cool, no? How many would enjoy that? No more questions. Now you know. And then he would tell you all the way he was worshipped in every religion, clarify everything. What would be the problem of a God arriving one day in your backyard and say, I am the Lord, worship me? Yes, Epstein.
It eradicates free will.
Very good. Why does it eradicate free will?
If you know what God is, if you do something wrong and you immediately get struck by lightning, for instance,
yes.
right? The classical case. You remove choices, right? There's no longer good or bad. There's the right choices and the wrong choices. And the right choices just become easy to make because, well, everybody knows what to actually put Freud in this. It's negative reinforcement.
Okay, very good.
Negative reinforcement does not exactly make free will. And if there is free will, then there's no way to have faith. And if you remove faith, you remove a core tenet of religion. Okay, excellent. That's exactly where Levinas is headed, right? In other words, he's saying God actually wants to seduce us into knowing him. He doesn't want to impose on us, here I am, brah, right? He wants to little by little seduce us into knowing him. And this is why he doesn't appear in all of his glory. Now let me explain how that works so you can see more clearly. Let's take an example of seduction
in day-to-day life, and you will see exactly what he's doing and why. So let's do, this is Seduction 101. If you don't know this, you will know, and you will not mess this first step up. Okay, let's make it super sexist. You're a guy, you're in a bar, and you see this cute girl, and you want to approach her. That's fine. Now, what are some fatal mistakes some of the guys do when they approach the girl? Okay, Peralta.
I feel like that don't work.
What?
Pickup lines.
What's that? Oh, pickup line. Yeah. Sorry.
I was like, what's that?
No, it's. I mean, okay, it depends on the pickup line, right? You don't want to be too obvious, right? If you come like, hey, babe, like, no, right? What that you have, in other words, it's not the fact that there's a pickup line. It's some pickup lines are not subtle. You see what I'm? So you want to be subtle in your pickup line. You see what I mean?
I don't think I ever seen that.
Okay, they're not subtle. Okay, so no pickup lines, guys, because they're not subtle enough. It's too obvious. The girl's like, yo, who are you? You, right? Okay, good. Peralta, what was the?
I was gonna say some people who enter bars are usually somewhat drunk. They usually try to put their arm.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yes. Happens all the time. Yes, when you come and you're in her space, right? You're standing too close, right? You start to touch where she doesn't want you to touch, right? And so now she's like, you're all over me. I can't, and it's over. Like after that, you have no more chances. This was, you burned it, right? Very good. What's another way? This is great examples, right? What are the problems with the two examples we saw? If you're putting the arm around or standing too close or a pickup line that's obvious. What's the problem? Why, women, tell us. What's the issue? Tell us what are you not liking about this whole experience? Too overwhelming, yeah? Creepy and needy. Okay, so it's too overwhelming. It's in your space. In other words, you don't have room as a woman to make a decision. It's already done deal, right? If you're too obvious, right? Let me be even more subtle. You never want to be too obvious at first because that doesn't give her the choice to desire you or not, right? If you're too obvious, the whole journey of desire is squished in the beginning. In other words, now there's no more, oh, I wonder if he likes me and do I want to like him? And then this process, right, where the woman kind of awakens to where you are, right? Amoroso.
I mean, it's just an interesting thought because that kind of sounds like God, like, wants us and, like, needs us to sort of be interested in him for so often, at least like I was taught, it's very like, oh, you don't believe hell.
Exactly. Exactly. No.
So it's a really interesting idea that he's like, he wants you to go to him.
Exactly.
I always thought God is like too good for us to like want for him to want for us to want him.
Yeah, absolutely. You're exactly where he's going, right? God is not pushy. He's not in your space. He's waiting to see how you will react, and then he makes the next move, right? This is the key in Seduction 101. You make a move, you want it to be subtle. Like, hey, me and some friends are going to get some coffee tomorrow. Would you like to come? Completely benign. The woman is like, maybe he likes me, maybe he doesn't, which is great. Because now she has the choice to awaken to you or not. And then if she comes, you move to the next level, lunch or dinner. If she doesn't come, you're back to square one. Got to start. You see what I'm saying? The seduction is a dance. Does she say yes? You move to the next step. She doesn't say anything, you stay back a little bit, right? You always want to be in tune with how she reacts. This is giving her the freedom to evolve, to progress, to awaken. If you're too much in her face, there's no awakening going to happen. It's already decided, right? It's a bunch of you are like wanting to... Yes, go ahead.
It's an interesting way of thinking about it, but if that's your conception, then to continue with the metaphor, some of these subtle moves that God makes are a lot of times not the wisest.
What do you mean?
Like sometimes, if this is God's way of reaching out to us, there are things that happen, things that people go through in life, which is a pretty terrible move on the part of God. So it's just hard to.
Oh, so you mean in terms of the suffering, or that other philosophers have said are inflicted?
People having very poor experiences with faith and religion.
Yes. So Levinas is here not focusing so much on God as a source of suffering like Rumi, right? Right? He's just saying, and he's going to, by the way, abandon this direction, right? We're going to see. All he's saying is that God, like a lover, is seducing, meaning he's subtle and he's waiting for a response before he makes the next move. That's it. Now, obviously, if he's going to destroy your families, that's not seduction, right? So Levinas is not talking about God in terms as the source of suffering, like Rumi, right? For him, this is not acceptable, right? God is not the source of suffering. In the midst of suffering, there are still sparks of God. That's how he sees it. Do you see what I mean? So he is not going to attribute suffering to God. He's not going to make that move. He's going to say, here's the suffering, yet within the suffering, signs of God, moments of seduction, glimpses. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. So the darkness, this is us, right? There he agrees with Maimonides, right? All of the darkness we are in is not like Rumi who says, God is gifting us with suffering, right? For Levinas, like Maimonides, is the same tradition. The darkness that we are in, we created. And yet within that darkness, you have moments, glimpses of God, right? This, says Levinas, if you receive it, there will be a next level, right? So in other words, God will make a move, and it depends on us whether or not he will make the next move and the next move and the next move. So God is constantly waiting to see if there is a response. A sign appears, right? You were driving, parking spot, classic, right? You got a parking spot out of the middle of Manhattan, and you happen to pray, whatever. Okay, now you could be like, oh, great, I found a parking spot. Maybe it's God. Well, maybe it's not. Present, absent, right? It could be, it could not be. But if you choose to open yourself to the possibility that maybe, then there will be more signs, right? But it's very similar to Marcel, right? Remember Marcel says we have to be permeable, open, and then we will receive these experiences. Levinas is saying something similar. Signs will come your way. Answers will come your way. Direction will come your way. It depends on how you receive it. If you receive it, if you're open to its provenance being perhaps from God, there will be more signs. But it's up to us. God will never barge in and impose and coerce and force himself on us. He's always waiting like a gentleman if you will accept or not the act of seduction. Are you following? Yes, Michel.
So it makes sense that God, by not being so hands-on, is trying to seduce, I guess, his followers. But like, how would Levinas then explain the Holocaust? Because through this hands-off approach, he's actually doing the reverse and like unseducing them. So like, at what point do you, like, does God understand, like, oh, I have to be hands-on? Like, if you're God, like, even though it's like a relationship between him and his followers, he's still obviously more powerful than we are. So he has to be the one to decide when am I hands-off and when am I hands-on.
Okay, so you have to have the answer to your question, you have to wait for the next lecture because that's where we'll talk about that. But to give you a quick answer, right, we will see that for Levinas, God is no more omnipotent. That's gone. You cannot have omnipotent God after the Holocaust, right? He will reconfigure the experience, right? And again, right, just what I said to Inoyetov, the Holocaust for Levinas is the doing of humanity. And God, in a way, is trying to, I can't find the word in English. How do you do when you're trying to find a path in the chaos? Is there a verb? Where's my SAT people? To kind of like this, doing this.
Navigate?
No, like you're lost, but you're still doing this. Groping, maybe? Huh? Like kind of groping, like the person coming. Huh? No, you're kind of trying to force your way out or force your way through.
Stumbling in the darkness?
Go ahead.
Stumbling in the
Yes,
darkness?
God is stumbling in the darkness. Okay. He's stumbling he's giving, sending emissions right, through the darkness, but because the darkness is so thick, it's just emissions. But to the degree that we receive the emissions, the darkness dissipates, right? But God is not the origin of that darkness. He is just sending signals, like alien spaceship, right? Okay, so yes, see.
Yeah, I know you said that Levinas is going to, destroy his own thinking later on, but this does remind me of this movie called Schindler's List, which is based on like this real life story, and I feel like that might be an example of God, sending a small signal. But the thing is, I feel like a lot of people, especially back then, wouldn't think of it as like that. With the example that you gave in the introductory picture of that child strangling to death, slowly dying from asphyxiation. It's a I don't know if a lot of people would agree with that.
Yeah, you mean with the child representing God? Yeah, I mean, for sure, his contemporaries agree with that, right? Nowadays, maybe not, but at the time of the Holocaust, God really did die, at least conceptually, right? We are left with nothing in terms of who is God and where is he. We don't know. That's, I think, what he meant when he said God is here, or not him, but in the story, God is here and the child dying, God is dying. And we'll see even more vividly how that works in the second class on Levinas. You'll see more clearly. So some of you already need that class, right? Okay, so summary, right? So for now we're seeing this, then we'll read the text really quick. So God, right, another reason why he's both present and absent and not obviously there and forcing himself in our lives like we've been, like it happens in many religions, right? In many religions are, in your face about God. And you have, historically that's how this has been done, right? They're in your face, and if you don't believe, you're going to hell, like Amoroso said, or they will put you through hell themselves, right? So this is where we are, right? So he's saying, no, he's shy, right? I want you to write this down because it's so powerful. God is shy, right? There's some attributes that we never would think to attribute to God, right? Shyness, or God is humble, or even God is poor, right? We'll talk about God is poor next time, right? But we tend to see God as, So this is where Levinas is saying, no, actually God is shy. He's trying to seduce you. So let's look at the text where he says this. I'm on page 70, the big paragraph. Right in the middle, you have the sentence, a lover makes an advance. So tell me when you're there. 70, big paragraph in the middle, a lover makes an advance. Okay, one more person who is there? Okay. So now it's comparing God to a lover, right? A lover makes an advance. But the provocative or seductive gesture has, if one likes, not interrupted the decency of the conversation and attitudes. In other words, it's subtle. It's not interrupting. Like all of a sudden you're like, what are you doing? Right? It's very subtle. It's barely noticeable, right? This is seduction. It withdraws as lightly as it had slipped in. And then he makes the connection with God, right? That God was revealed on a mountain or in a burning bush or was attested to in scripture. And then he himself is like, but what if that was a storm? How can we be sure God is in the scripture? How can we be sure he was in the burning bush? What if scriptures came to us from dreamers? You see the perpetual doubt, and you're never sure, right? And then he says this, the insinuation itself invites us to do so. And now here's the punchline. It is up to us, or more exactly, it is up to me to retain or to repel this God without boldness, right? In other words, to the degree that I am open to these signs, I will get more signs. If I'm closed off, God will never push, right? Will never shove his way into our lives. And so in a way, there is an element of consent here. In the spiritual relationship, God is waiting for your consent. As long as you are not consenting, he will respect that. The day you consent and you're open, well, maybe, let me explore, let's see where this goes, then you will get more and more signs and answers and moments of seduction. Right? Does that make sense? Everybody with me? Following? Okay. Was there a question? I thought, not you? Okay, good. Okay, so now we're seeing, right, this other, my computer about to die. Actually, since this camera is not working, I might as well plug it in. Okay. So now we're seeing, right, two reasons why God is both present and absent. On the one hand, he's present and absent because if he wasn't, it wouldn't be God. In other words, we have to accept, even as believers, that there should always be an element of doubt in our relationship. We should never be completely sure who God is, what he wants, where he's taking us, right? What is the truth? We should never be completely sure. And in a way, what Levinas is saying, which is very close to Maimonides, right, is that doubt, questioning, is the royal road to God. Let me say that again, right? For Levinas, just like we saw for Maimonides, the ability to doubt, the ability to question, to maintain a critical stance as you are progressing in the relationship is actually the royal road to God. If you're certain, it's idolatry. Either way, if you're certain there is a God, idolatry. If you're certain there is no God, this is still, in a way, right, idolatry because you have constructed this. But if you're agnostic and you're not sure and you're open, that's the path to truth, right? So he's really saying the path of agnosticism is the healthiest path, is the most truthful and sincere path to God. If you're a complete atheist, you have already decided, right? You're closed off. And if you're a complete believer where you're sure of who God is, both for him are, in a way, cutting themselves off from any type of truth because they have decided, right, what they want to believe, in a way. But the agnostic is always open, is always willing to go this way or that way. That is the highest path, and that is the royal road to God, according to Levinas, right? So that's the first thing we saw. And then the second thing we saw is that, right, God is present and absent because he wants to seduce us, right? He doesn't want to impose. He wants us to consent before he makes the next move, right? Now, going now to where Levinas is going to go from here. Interestingly, when Levinas talks about the seduction of God, this is really, he's really moving there in the direction of having again a connection, right? He's sensing in a way the wooing of God. And what's interesting is that Levinas is going to, in fact, turn his back on that. And we're going to understand why in a second. I will tell you a story first. So Levinas, this is a true story. Shortly after the war, you remember I told you his whole extended family was killed in the Holocaust. He just his wife and his daughter were saved, right? So he's wandering the streets of Paris, right, like many survivors, just kind of lost, right? And in this moment of kind of really despair and confusion, he enters a church, right? He enters a church, and the first, churches have beautiful images, right, that are painted sometimes in the windows and so forth. So the first image he sees is the image of the story of Hannah in the Hebrew Bible, right? So anybody know the story of Hannah in the Hebrew Bible? What's this story? Yes, Epstein, go ahead.
There was a barren woman
Yes.
who prayed to God every year for children. Eventually, she went to the temple and prayed there. The high priest at the time mistook her for a drunk, which was forbidden to pray at the temple while drunk, and tried to throw her out. But a heavenly voice came down and told her, no, she's righteous, and told the high priest that she was righteous, and he blessed her and told her she would have a son. That son ended up becoming the greatest prophet, one of the greatest prophets in Jewish history, who anointed the first king of Israel and David.
Okay, very good explanation, right? There's a woman, she's childless. She's in competition with another wife. There's two wives in the relationship. The other wife is popping out children every year, right? And then she's nagging her, right? Not only she's popping out children, but she's nagging her. So she is really in a state of complete despair and just sorrow. She goes to the temple, and what's interesting, she does something which hasn't been really documented. She weeps very openly before God in the temple precinct. Usually you go to the temple, you offer the sacrifice, right? There's no record of sitting there and just, So she's engaged in this prayer, right? And she's crying out to God, and she's weeping, and she's so all over the place that she's mistaken for a drunk. So you can imagine what she was doing, right? If you saw the last drunk in the street, that's what she looks like. She's just pulling out her hair. She's really, really in despair. And so, but it's this moment that is depicted in the image, right, in the church. So later on, like Epstein says, the priest sees her, realizes she's not drunk, and grants her the wish, right? But the image in the church is her in this state of despair, talking to God and pouring her heart out to God, right? And Levinas stands a very long time in front of that picture, right? And you have to realize where he's at psychologically, right? This is a man who probably hasn't shed a single tear yet for what has happened. Right? There is the survivor's guilt. There is the inability to share what he has gone through with anyone. There is the inability to weep, right? Sometimes when you go through something as traumatic, you can't cry. And it's all there, right? Clammed up in his heart. And he's seeing this poignant vision of this woman pouring her heart to God, having someone where she can share her sorrow, and God listening, right? And receiving her. And he looks at this painting for so long as though he's thinking, can I do this? Is this for me? Am I allowed to pour out my heart in this way? And he decides that day, no, this is not for me. And he walks away. And the reason that he says this isn't for him is that how can I find comfort and consolation when so many of my own people died with no comfort and no consolation. So out of respect for the victims, he chooses to not be comforted, right? Let me say that again so you can write it down, right? So Levinas refuses the possibility of a relationship with God, right? Even though he's sensing the pull, the attraction, right, to the invitation, right, of God for him to pour out his heart. This is one of the signs. This is an invitation. Do this. Come. Pour your heart out. I will listen. I will receive. He hears the invitation, but he turns his back because out of respect for the victims. His rationale is, how can I be comforted if they died with no comfort and no consolation? Out of solidarity with my people, I will refuse to be comforted. And this is why in Levinas, when you read, there is no peace. There is no peace. There is no moment in Levinas where you can breathe or exhale, right? With Marcel, yes, you can rest in being, right? You can connect. Levinas remains tortured until the end, and he chooses this, right? He chooses to remain tortured out of respect for the victims, right? So from now on, this idea of connecting to God, of being seduced by God or wooed by God or of receiving invitations by God, he's not going to choose that path. This is a very rare moment where he's describing this possibility that was sitting there for him, but he will opt out of it, right? That he will not give his consent. And so we'll see how he finds a different path, right? Next time when we study the text together, he is going to lead us through a different path, which is the path that Barbara was already hinting at, which is the path of ethics, right? So we're going to talk about that. Okay, any questions on Levinas, on anything we did? Okay, perfect. Okay, so it should be clear now. Hopefully now you're a little more comfortable with the text. Good, Hack, thank you. Right. And now you're going to read the second section where he's talking about ethics, which is this alternative route to God. And be prepared. New concept of God. You have to throw away everything you know in order to be able to follow him there. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.